trail camera footage shows everything. A massive, dark figure moving through the Oregon wilderness, walking slowly through the snow alongside a small child in a blue winter coat. That coat is unmistakable the jacket my 8-year-old son Derek was wearing when he vanished 5 years ago. The child walks calmly beside the towering creature, showing no fear, no distress, only the quiet companionship of someone who has found their place in a world that shouldn't exist. What you're about to hear is the true account of that December day in 1998, and the evidence I've gathered since then that proves Derek wasn't lost, wasn't taken by a human predator, and isn't dead. He was adopted by something that the world calls Bigfoot. My name is Tom, and this is the story of how I lost my son to the wilderness and how I'm going to get him back. December 5th, 1998 began as a perfect winter morning for our annual Christmas tree hunting expedition. The Oregon forest stretched endlessly around us, blanketed in fresh snow that crunched beneath our boots as we ventured deeper into the Fremont-Wenema National Forest. Derek, my energetic 8-year-old son, bounded ahead through the knee-deep powder, his excitement infectious as he searched for the perfect tree to grace our living room. We'd made this trip every year since Derek could walk, a father-son tradition that meant everything to both of us. Derek lived for these outdoor adventures. At home, when he wasn't exploring the woods behind our house, he spent hours watching wildlife documentaries, dreaming of the creatures he might encounter in the wild. His fascination with nature earned him the nickname Bear Boy among our friends and family. That morning, Derek carried his small hatchet with the pride of a seasoned woodsman, chattering endlessly about which ornaments would look best on which branches. His cheeks were red from the cold, his eyes bright with the pure joy that only children possess when surrounded by natural wonder. The forest felt magical that day. Ancient evergreens heavy with snow creating a winter wonderland that seemed straight from a Christmas card. We had special permission to cut 3 trees, so we planned to venture far from the usual spots where other families gathered. The deeper we went, the more pristine and untouched the wilderness became. 2 hours into our hike, Derek spotted something that would change our lives forever. A set of tracks in the snow unlike anything I'd ever seen. They were enormous, easily twice the size of my own footprints, and pressed deep into the snow, suggesting whatever made them carried immense weight. The stride length was impossible for any human. Each print measured roughly 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, with what appeared to be distinct toe impressions clearly visible in the snow. The tracks led deeper into the forest, disappearing into a section of woods so dense the canopy blocked most of the afternoon sunlight. Something primal in my gut screamed danger. These weren't bear tracks. I'd seen plenty of those over the years. They weren't from any known animal in these mountains. They were something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist but had clearly passed through just hours before our arrival. Derek was mesmerized by the discovery, his young mind interpreting the mysterious tracks as an exciting puzzle to solve rather than a warning to flee. Before I could stop him, he was following the trail, calling back that he wanted to see where they led. I should have grabbed him right then, should have dragged him back to the truck and driven home without a backward glance. But Derek was already 50 yards ahead, his small figure darting between the trees with the fearless enthusiasm of childhood. My father, who had joined us for the expedition, urged me to let the boy explore. Within minutes, Derek had disappeared from sight, swallowed by the ancient forest that suddenly felt more like a predator than a playground. At first, we assumed Derek was just beyond the next cluster of trees, focused on whatever fascinating discovery had captured his attention. Children have a way of becoming completely absorbed in their explorations, losing track of time and distance when something captures their imagination. We continued our search for the perfect Christmas trees, occasionally calling out to make sure Derek was within earshot. His voice would drift back through the trees, cheerful and unconcerned, assuring us he was fine and had found something interesting. But then the responses stopped. The forest fell silent except for the whisper of wind through snow-laden branches. Our calls for Derek echoed through the trees, growing more desperate with each unanswered shout. The winter afternoon was already beginning to fade, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. When we finally regrouped to compare our tree selections, the horrible realization hit us. Derek wasn't with either of us. We had each assumed he was with the other, but he was nowhere to be found. The magical winter wonderland had become a nightmare maze where my son had simply vanished. We immediately began tracking Derek's footprints in the snow, a task that should have been simple given the clear impressions his boots left in the fresh powder. His trail was easy to follow at first, small, distinct boot prints leading deeper into the forest, following alongside those massive, inexplicable tracks we'd discovered earlier. But then something happened that defied all logic and reason. About a quarter mile from where we'd last seen Derek, his footprints simply ended, not gradually, as if he'd turned around or changed direction. They just stopped as if he'd been lifted straight up into the air and carried away. The enormous tracks continued for another 100 feet before disappearing into a rocky area where the snow was too thin to hold clear impressions. It was as if whatever creature had made those prints had taken Derek with it, carrying him over terrain where no traces could be left behind. We searched frantically as darkness fell, our flashlight beams cutting through the shadows between the trees. The temperature plummeted to well below freezing, and the reality of Derek's situation became increasingly dire. An 8-year-old boy couldn't survive a night in these conditions, not without shelter, food, or warm clothing beyond his winter coat. Near the spot where Derek's tracks had ended, we found something that chilled us more than the December cold. A perfect snow angel impression, the kind children make by lying down and moving their arms and legs. But this impression was larger than Derek could have made, and something about it felt wrong, too deliberate, too perfect, almost like a message or a lure. 50 yards away, we discovered a makeshift shelter constructed from broken tree branches. The structure was sophisticated, far too advanced for a frightened 8-year-old to have built, especially in the gathering darkness. The branches used in construction were thick, some as wide as my arm, and several had been snapped cleanly in half, a feat that would have required immense strength. The shelter was large enough to house a creature much bigger than Derek, yet it had clearly been built recently. The broken ends of the branches were fresh, with sap still oozing from the breaks. Whatever had constructed this shelter possessed both intelligence and physical power far beyond human capability. As the search area expanded and more volunteers arrived, additional evidence began to surface that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of Derek's disappearance. Word of Derek's disappearance spread quickly through our small community and beyond. Within hours, hundreds of volunteers had assembled, forming human chains that combed every inch of the snow-covered terrain. Local law enforcement coordinated with state authorities to launch one of the largest search operations in Oregon's history. Police helicopters equipped with infrared technology swept the area from above, their thermal cameras capable of detecting body heat through the forest canopy. Search and rescue teams brought in specially trained dogs to try to pick up Derek's scent and follow his trail. For 7 days, the search continued around the clock. Volunteers came from neighboring states, strangers united by the desperate hope of finding one lost little boy. The media attention was overwhelming. News crews from across the country descended on our small town, turning our family tragedy into a national story. But despite all the technology, all the manpower, all the prayers, Derek remained missing. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed him whole. leaving behind only questions and the growing certainty that something unprecedented had occurred in those ancient woods. The search dogs provided the first concrete evidence that something unnatural was happening in the forest. These were experienced animals trained to track missing persons in all kinds of terrain and weather conditions. But when brought to the area where Derek's tracks had disappeared, they behaved in ways their handlers had never seen before. Instead of picking up a scent trail and following it with their characteristic focused determination, the dogs became agitated and fearful. Several whimpered and backed away from the area, their tails tucked between their legs in classic submission postures. Others began howling, not the purposeful baying of dogs on a trail, but something that sounded almost like terror. One experienced handler, a man with 30 years of search and rescue work behind him, admitted privately that he'd never seen anything like it. The dogs were clearly detecting something in that area, but whatever it was inspired fear rather than the hunting instinct these animals had been trained to follow. Two of the dogs actually refused to enter the section of forest where Derek's tracks ended, despite repeated commands from their handlers. When forced into the area, they became so distressed that they had to be removed from the search entirely. On the third day of the search, volunteers made another discovery that raised more questions than it answered. Additional sets of the massive footprints in a muddy area near a stream about half a mile from Derek's last known location. These prints were even clearer than the ones we'd originally found, showing distinct toe impressions and what appeared to be a heel strike pattern. The prints measured exactly 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, with a gait pattern that suggested a creature capable of taking strides longer than any human could manage. A local tracker brought in to help with the search examined the prints extensively and declared them unlike anything in his 40 years of experience. The depth of the impressions suggested a creature weighing at least 400 pounds, yet the spacing indicated a bipedal locomotion pattern rather than the four-legged gait of known large animals in the region. More prints were discovered over the following days, creating a trail that led deeper into the wilderness, far from any roads or human habitation. The pattern suggested purposeful movement rather than random wandering, as if whatever creature had made them was following a specific route through the forest. After 7 days of intensive searching, officials made the heartbreaking decision to call off the operation. The harsh winter weather, the enormous size of the search area, and the safety concerns for the hundreds of volunteers made continuing the effort too dangerous. But my family refused to give up. We organized our own search parties, returning to the forest every weekend for months. We posted flyers throughout the region, offering a substantial reward for any information leading to Derek's recovery. That weathered, faded flyer still hangs on a tree near where he disappeared, a testament to our refusal to abandon hope. About a month after Derek's disappearance, a hiker found 2 items that reignited the investigation: a school bookmark that belonged to Derek and a candy wrapper from his favorite treat. Both were discovered several miles from where he had last been seen, in an area that had been thoroughly searched multiple times. More significantly, there were traces of blood on both items, not large amounts, but enough to suggest that Derek had been injured, possibly from cuts or scrapes sustained while being moved through difficult terrain. The discovery of these items so far from the original search area proved that Derek had been transported, but the question remained, by whom or what? The terrain between where he'd disappeared and where the items were found was virtually impassable for a child, requiring travel over steep, rocky ground and through dense underbrush that would challenge even experienced hikers. But it was what happened 5 years later, in 2003, that provided the evidence I'd been desperately seeking and confirmed my growing suspicion about what had really happened to my son. In November 2003, a bow hunter was pursuing deer in the same general area where Derek had vanished. He had set up a trail camera to monitor animal movements when it captured something that would change everything I thought I knew about my son's disappearance. The footage showed a massive humanoid creature walking upright through the forest. The being stood at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, with arms that hung down past its knees, and a bulk that suggested immense physical strength. But what made the footage truly extraordinary was what walked beside it. Next to the enormous creature, walking calmly through the snow, was a small figure in a blue winter coat, a child who appeared completely unafraid of the massive being towering above him. The child's gait was natural and unhurried, suggesting not captivity but companionship. When the footage was enhanced by technical specialists, the coat showed characteristics identical to the one Derek had been wearing when he disappeared. The video quality was remarkable, captured in broad daylight with perfect clarity. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed details of the creature's anatomy that were unlike any known primate species. The skull shape, the proportions of the limbs, the fluid manner in which it moved through difficult terrain. Wildlife experts who examined the footage were unanimous in their conclusion that this was not a person in a costume or a known animal. The biomechanics displayed by the subject, the natural way it interacted with its forest environment, and the consistency of its movement patterns all indicated a real, living creature. Multiple experts examined the hunter's footage, and their findings were both scientifically rigorous and deeply unsettling. Primatologists noted that while the creature displayed characteristics similar to great apes, its upright locomotion and limb proportions were unlike any cataloged species. Anthropologists pointed out that the skull shape visible in several frames suggested a brain case larger than modern humans, with bone structure that appeared more robust and primitive. The creature's behavior, moving purposefully through the forest while carrying what appeared to be precious cargo, indicated intelligence and planning capability. Most significantly for my family, fabric analysis specialists examined enhanced frames showing the child walking beside the creature. They identified what appeared to be synthetic material consistent with modern winter clothing, specifically the type of insulated fabric used in children's coats during the late 1990s. The child's size, posture, and the familiar blue coat all suggested this was Derek 5 years after his disappearance. Most disturbing and hopeful at the same time was the child's demeanor. He walked freely beside the creature, showing no signs of fear or distress. The careful, protective manner in which the massive being stayed close to the child indicated a relationship built on trust rather than captivity. For 5 years, I had avoided the obvious conclusion that all evidence pointed toward. The idea that my son had been taken by a creature that most people consider mythological seemed too fantastic to accept, too much like the plot of a horror movie rather than reality. But the evidence was overwhelming when examined objectively. The enormous footprints that had led Derek away from our group matched known casts of alleged Bigfoot tracks from incidents throughout the Pacific Northwest. The sophisticated shelter construction required strength and intelligence beyond normal human capability, consistent with accounts of Bigfoot behavior from researchers who had studied the phenomenon for decades. The frightened reaction of trained search dogs suggested they were detecting something that triggered their deepest survival instincts, a reaction typically reserved for apex predators. The blood evidence found miles from the disappearance site indicated Derek had been transported over terrain that would be impossible for a child to navigate alone. Most compelling of all, the hunter's footage showing a Bigfoot-like creature walking peacefully alongside what appeared to be a child provided visual confirmation of what I'd begun to suspect years earlier, that Derek hadn't been taken as prey, but had somehow been adopted into their world. My research into Derek's disappearance led me to discover that our case was not unique. Hundreds of children vanish in wilderness areas every year under circumstances that don't fit typical patterns of getting lost or being abducted by humans. These disappearances share common characteristics. Children found miles from where they disappeared, often in terrain too difficult for them to navigate alone. Discoveries in areas that have been thoroughly searched multiple times, and when found alive, the children often have no memory of how they traveled such distances or what happened during their absence. Former law enforcement investigators who have studied these cases note that traditional search and rescue techniques often fail to locate missing children who are later found in impossible locations. The pattern suggests that these children are being moved by someone or something with intimate knowledge of wilderness terrain and the ability to travel undetected through areas that would challenge experienced outdoorsmen. What disturbs me most about Derek's case is the evidence of deliberate intelligence behind his disappearance. The snow angel impression found near where his tracks ended was too perfect, too obviously artificial to be coincidental. It appeared to be a message or perhaps a lure designed to attract attention. The makeshift shelter discovered nearby showed planning and construction skills that indicated advanced problem-solving ability. The use of available materials, the understanding of weather protection, and the structural integrity of the design all suggested a creature capable of complex thought and planning. Most significantly, the careful manner in which Derek appeared to have been transported, moved over difficult terrain without leaving a trail, carried to a location miles from where he disappeared, indicated not just physical capability, but strategic thinking. These were not the actions of a mindless predator operating on instinct. They suggested a being capable of planning, decision-making, and perhaps even emotional attachment to whatever it had taken. People often ask how I function knowing that my son was taken by something that shouldn't exist. How do I go to work, maintain relationships, continue living while believing Derek is somewhere in the wilderness, possibly still alive after 5 years? The answer is simple. I have no choice. Every piece of evidence points to Derek being alive. Every instinct I have as his father tells me he's out there, somewhere in the vast forests of the Pacific Northwest, either being cared for by these creatures or having learned to survive among them. That possibility that Derek is alive is both my greatest hope and my deepest torment. I imagine him growing up in the wilderness, learning to live in a world completely different from the one he knew as a child. Has he forgotten his human family? Does he remember his name, his life before that December day? I return to those woods every month, equipped with trail cameras and the knowledge I've gained about Bigfoot behavior patterns over 5 years of intensive study. I've learned to recognize signs of their presence: trees twisted at heights no human could reach, stick formations that appear deliberately arranged, and areas where the normal sounds of forest life fall unnaturally silent. I've installed a network of cameras throughout the region, hoping to capture evidence of Derek or his captors. The cameras have recorded numerous anomalies: massive shadowy figures moving between the trees, enormous footprints appearing overnight, and structures built from forest materials that show intelligence and planning. 3 times over the past 5 years, I've had what I believe were direct encounters with these creatures. The first was just a glimpse of something enormous moving through the trees about 50 yards away. Too brief to capture on camera, but long enough to confirm that something large and bipedal was watching me from the shadows. The second encounter involved finding fresh tracks near one of my cameras, prints that appeared overnight and led toward a section of forest so dense that following them was impossible. The tracks were accompanied by what appeared to be smaller footprints, human-sized prints that could have belonged to a child or teenager. I built a cabin deep in the forest, 3 miles from where Derek vanished. It's a simple structure, 4 walls, a roof, and a single window that faces the endless expanse of trees where my son disappeared. I spend most nights there now, sitting by that window with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, watching the shadows move between the ancient pines. The silence out there is different from anywhere else I've ever been. It's thick, oppressive, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. During the day, I search the trails, following deer paths and creek beds, looking for any sign that Derek passed this way. Sometimes I think I hear his laughter drifting through the trees, that bright, innocent sound that used to fill our house. But when I stop to listen, really listen, there's nothing but the whisper of wind through the branches. Those moments of phantom laughter are the cruelest trick my mind plays on me. I'll be examining a broken branch or studying the soft earth near a stream when Derek's giggle will reach my ears, as clear as if he were standing right beside me. My heart will race and I'll call out his name, crashing through the underbrush toward the sound. But I always find nothing, just more trees, more shadows, more silence. Every few months I find them, fresh tracks pressed deep into the muddy earth near streams or in the soft soil of clearings, massive footprints that dwarf my own with a stride length that no human could manage. They appear overnight as if whatever makes them moves only in darkness, always staying one step ahead of my searching. The tracks are always the same, 18 inches long, 8 inches wide, with distinct toe impressions that suggest something walking upright on 2 legs. I've made plaster casts of dozens of them over the years, creating a collection that fills one wall of my cabin. Each cast is identical to the others, proving that the same creature continues to move through these woods. Sometimes the tracks lead toward my cabin, stopping just at the edge of the clearing where the trees give way to the small space I've carved out of the wilderness. I'll find them in the morning, pressed into the damp earth only 50 yards from where I sleep, and I'll know that something was watching me in the darkness. The nights are the worst. I sit at my window with a flashlight and a thermos of coffee, scanning the tree line for any movement, any sign that something is out there. The darkness between the trees seems alive, shifting and changing in ways that make my eyes strain and my imagination run wild. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement, a shadow that's darker than the rest, a shape that seems too large and moves too deliberately to be a deer or bear. But when I focus the flashlight beam on the spot, there's nothing there. Just trees and darkness and the growing certainty that I'm being watched. I've grown accustomed to the sounds of the forest at night, the hoot of owls, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the occasional crack of a falling branch. But sometimes there are other sounds that don't belong to any animal I know. Deep, guttural vocalizations that seem to come from multiple directions at once, as if several large creatures are communicating in the darkness just beyond my sight. There's a weight to the silence in these woods, a presence that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up even on the warmest days. I've learned to trust that feeling, that primitive instinct that tells me when something is nearby, watching from the shadows. During my searches, I'll suddenly feel eyes on me, that unmistakable sensation of being observed by something hidden. I'll turn around slowly, scanning the forest behind me, but there's never anything visible. Just trees and shadows, and the growing conviction that something intelligent is tracking my movements. The feeling is strongest near the spot where Derek disappeared. There's a quality to the air there, a thickness that seems to muffle sound and distort distance. I can spend hours in that area, calling Derek's name and searching for clues, and the entire time I feel like I'm being studied by something that understands far more about the situation than I do. I've become something of a hermit in my pursuit of the truth. Friends and family stopped visiting long ago, unable to understand why I continue searching for something that most people don't believe exists. My ex-wife thinks I've lost my mind, and maybe she's right, but I can't stop because stopping would mean accepting that Derek is truly gone. Every morning I pack my backpack with water, food, and camera equipment, then head deeper into the forest than I went the day before. I'm methodical in my search, marking trees to keep track of areas I've covered, taking photographs of anything unusual, collecting samples of hair or other materials that might provide evidence. The forest has become my world, and my cabin has become my base of operations. I know these woods better now than the neighborhood where I used to live. I can navigate by the shape of certain trees, recognize streams by the sound of their current, predict weather changes by the way the wind shifts through the canopy. 5 years of searching has taught me that something lives in the deepest parts of these woods, something that doesn't want to be found but can't resist watching the man who refuses to give up. Whether it's the creature that took Derek or something else entirely, I know it's out there. On the clearest nights when the moon is full and the shadows are sharp, I sometimes see shapes moving between the trees that are too large and too purposeful to be anything natural. They stay at the edge of visibility, always just beyond the reach of my flashlight, but they're there. And somewhere in that darkness, in those vast expanses of wilderness where no human foot has ever walked, I believe Derek is still alive. Whether he's been changed by his experience, whether he remembers his old life, whether he even knows I'm looking for him, these are questions I may never have answered. But I'll keep searching, keep watching from my cabin window, keep following those massive tracks whenever I find them. Because a father's love doesn't die just because the world has become stranger and more terrifying than anyone wants to admit. Despite the pain, despite the years of searching without reunion, despite the skepticism of those who think I'm living in denial, I continue because the alternative is unthinkable. If Derek is alive, if he's learned to survive and even thrive in a world most people don't believe exists, then abandoning the search would be abandoning him. Every piece of evidence I've collected, every expert opinion I've sought, every moment of careful analysis points to the same conclusion. Derek was taken by creatures that exist in the deepest wilderness, beings that have learned to remain hidden from human civilization while maintaining their own complex society. Whether Derek has been adopted into their community, whether he's being raised as one of their own, or whether he's simply learned to survive alongside them, I believe he's alive. That belief may be all I have left, but it's enough to keep me searching. I've made a decision that will probably seem extreme to anyone reading this account. I'm permanently relocating to a cabin I've built near the site where Derek disappeared. I've resigned from my job, sold my house, and dedicated the remainder of my life to finding my son. For 5 years, I've been gathering evidence, studying these creatures, learning their patterns and behaviors. Now I'm going to attempt direct contact. I've been leaving regular offerings of food in locations where I've found evidence of their activity: fruits, vegetables, bread, and other items that disappear completely within days. I've gradually moved these offerings closer to my cabin, hoping to establish a pattern of non-threatening interaction. I've also been leaving items that might be meaningful to Derek: photographs of our family, small toys he loved as a child, drawings of memories we shared together. Some of these items disappear as well, always replaced with small tokens that suggest they've been seen and understood. My hope is that if Derek is with them, if he's grown up among them but still retains some memory of his human family, these familiar objects might prompt him to make contact. Even if he's forgotten English, even if he's been completely integrated into their society, somewhere in his heart he might remember the father who loved him. Son, if you're out there, if you've learned to live in that world between the human and the wild, I want you to know that your father never stopped looking for you. Every day for 5 years, I've thought about you, hoped for you, searched for you. I know you've probably changed in ways I can't imagine. You might not remember our old life together, our traditions, the games we used to play. But I hope somewhere in your heart you remember that you were loved completely and unconditionally, that you belong to a family that would never give up on you. I'm not trying to take you away from whatever life you've built. I just want to know that you're safe, to see for myself that you've grown into whoever you were meant to become, and to tell you one more time that your father loves you exactly as you are. Derek's disappearance has taught me that the wilderness holds secrets we're not prepared to acknowledge. In our arrogance, we assume that humans are the only intelligent species on this continent, that we've cataloged and categorized every creature that walks through our forests. But the evidence suggests otherwise. There are beings in the deep woods that bridge the gap between animal and human, creatures that have learned to remain hidden while maintaining their own complex societies. They've watched us, studied us, and occasionally interacted with us in ways we dismiss as folklore or misidentification. The truth is that we share this continent with intelligences we don't understand, and sometimes, for reasons beyond our comprehension, those intelligences make contact with our world in ways that forever change the lives they touch. Derek's story isn't unique. It's part of a pattern that stretches back generations, a pattern we've chosen to ignore because the alternative challenges everything we think we know about the natural world. To other parents who've lost children under mysterious circumstances in wilderness areas, trust your instincts. If something tells you your child is still alive, if the official explanations don't feel complete or accurate, don't stop searching. The truth may be stranger than you've been told, but it's still the truth. And to the creatures who took my son, I'm coming not as an enemy, but as a father who needs to know his child is safe. I don't seek to expose your existence or threaten your privacy. I only want what any parent would want, to see my son one more time and to know that he's found a place in this world where he can be happy. Derek, wherever you are, whatever you've become, you're still my son. The forest may have claimed you, but love transcends any boundary between the civilized and the wild. I'll never stop looking for you. I'll never stop believing you're out there. And someday, whether in this world or whatever comes after, we'll be together again. The search continues. The truth waits in the shadows between the trees. And a father's love remains stronger than the fear of the unknown. For more interesting stories like this one, consider checking this.